Working It Out, a podcast show about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplaces, our communities, and our lives. A show where we put diversity and inclusion to work.
Got problems on the job, we're working it out. Workplace got you stressing, we're working it out. Yeah, we're working it out, working it out, working it out.
Hi, I'm Dr. Vanessa Weaver, your host of Working It Out, the show where we put diversity and inclusion to work. I want to ensure that we're all on the same page when we talk about when this show uses the term diversity, equity, inclusion, because sometimes people ask me, well, what does that really mean? So I kind of have a simple way for you to think about it. Diversity is being asked to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And equity is making sure that you can get to the party. Michelle Obama, our former First Lady, recently openly acknowledged that she often experienced imposter syndrome. And that's going to be our topic for the show today. Her sharing that sparked a tremendous conversation about imposter syndrome and what it really means for a Black woman, for people of color, for other diverse equity, for other diverse cohorts, and also just people in general. Imposter syndrome is really characterized by self-doubt, when you often have this fear of, are you good enough? Will people really discover that you're not as connected or you're not as on top of this topic as you thought you were? And individuals grapple with these thoughts, and particularly when people of color are faced with this, they wonder, am I just really here because of affirmative action? And many times people have said that, so we often sometimes really believe it. So the problem with the imposter syndrome is not that you ask the question itself, because for many people, in fact, the data says that 70% of us will raise that question to ourselves. Well, am I really ready for this job? Am I really good enough for this job? The challenge with imposter syndrome comes when that becomes a habitual habit, when you really become so obsessed with it or so soar with it that it immobilizes the choices you have and pursuing other opportunities. And I can tell you for over 30 years, I've been coaching in corporate America, and this is a real topic. So people sometimes think these titles mean little or nothing, but I can tell you that imposter syndrome is real for a lot of us. And so at some juncture in our lives, after we've experienced this, we need to take a pause and say, hey, is this a problem for me? Is this something that I need to get some coaching and some advice on? So in today's show, we are really excited to have with us the renowned Iyanla Vanzant, an incredible woman that I just admire and have a tremendous respect for. As many of you know, Iyanla executive produced, and starred in her own show, Iyanla Fix My Life, for over 9 years. And she coached not only celebrities, but everyday people. And not only was she in that top rated show, but Iyanla is a prolific author. She has written over 19 books, sold 10 million copies, and those books were translated into 26 languages. So she's not only read in the United States, but she is known all around the world. And she is a force for good, having impacted so many of our lives. So on today's episode, Iyanla will delve into her perspective of the imposter syndrome. And sometimes people call it different things. So, we might slide into some different terminology. We'll help you with that when we do that. But Iyanla is going to talk to us about her take on the imposter syndrome, and also not only how it shows up, but also she will help give some suggestions to many of you who might be experiencing that. So Iyanla, I just want to say thank you for coming to the show today.
Yeah, thank you for helping us work it out, okay? Because when you gave your definition and you said diversity was being invited to the dance, inclusion was being asked to dance, I said that equity is being able to eat at the dance, that they pass the hors d'oeuvres by you.
Uh, well, you know what? I'm going to make sure I include that. I like that. Anything with eating, I enjoy it. Iyanla, before we delve into this imposter syndrome and how it shows up and what people can do about it, I would just love for you to share with me and our audience what motivates you to engage in this kind of work, where you coaching individuals to be our best selves and to making really some informed decisions about how we're going to live our lives. I guess I could ask
That's
you,
a
what's your
big
why?
question. Probably because I'm crazy, but
Well, that's our secret, Iyanla. We're not telling the world about that.
well, I am a lawyer by training.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always been for me about supporting people and moving through difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
My deepest desire in my heart was always to be a nurse. I wanted
Oh,
to be a nurse.
I didn't even know
And
that.
yeah, I wanted to be a nurse. I went to nursing school for one day, not even one day, maybe 3 hours. And in my classroom, I was sitting in the lab, and there were little baby pigs in a jar. And I said to the instructor, "Is there ever going to come a day when me and one of those pigs have to interface with each other?" And she said, "Oh, yes." And I left. But, Vanessa, it was really a calling. I guess when your purpose unfolds in you and you just take one step after the other in your purpose, it
Mm-hmm.
blossoms. I didn't start out doing this. I started out teaching women on public assistance who were getting ready to go back to work. So I was teaching them job readiness and life skills. And
Mm-hmm.
that blossomed into one thing. It ended up with me having a radio show and then writing my first book. So again, I know it's my purpose. I know I am on purpose, and I just follow God's direction and do as I'm told most of the time.
Well, Iyanla, I've often said to you that we know, as you know, I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, and we have different approaches to help people identify what some of the issues they're dealing with, and hopefully to grow and to heal and grow from them. But I was always so fascinated on Iyanla Fix My Life, how quickly you got folks to not only identify and work, but work their issue and work it to some resolution. I just said, now I spent all of those years in graduate school getting this PhD, and here my sister Iyanla is getting folks to resolve these issues in a matter of a few hours. How phenomenal that
Yeah,
is! But it was clear to me it was a gift, and
yeah,
and I just
it is.
appreciate the way you've chosen to use that gift to help others. So let's get into this imposter syndrome. What's your perspective on that? Do you believe that there is an imposter syndrome?
Oh,
Syndrome?
absolutely. I experienced it myself when my daughter Jamia died,
Mm,
and I'm saving everybody in the world, and I can solve this problem and that problem, and I couldn't save my own child. So it
mm,
really made me doubt, myself, my capacity. What am I doing? And it didn't help that other people were saying that on social media. That didn't help either, you know. And the thing that I know is that whole notion of I'm not good enough, I'm not doing it right. It can either grow from inside of you, what you're telling yourself, your own internal narrative, or
hmm
it can be a response and a reaction to what's coming at you. I mean, even today, you can go on social media today and find a dozen people who are calling me a fraud. She don't know what she's doing. She's a fraud. She's not this. She's not that. But it doesn't bother me anymore because I had to walk through that experience after Jamia died. So
Well,
it's
can you?
real.
Well, when you say you had to walk through that experience, and of course, you and I was involved and connected to you with you through all that experience, and the pain that I felt, and I know it was not the pain of a mother, was just tremendous because Jamia was so brilliant and so kind, and really a full partner with you in your business, and so
Yeah.
to lose all of that in a daughter, I just couldn't comprehend the pain that you must be feeling. So how did you walk through that? And No, you said you had to walk through it. Talk a little bit about how you walked through that
Well, that's
imposter
just what I
syndrome.
did. Walk through it. And as you said in your opening, very often that those thoughts, that narrative, those feelings can become debilitating.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's funny because one day I was having, just a total breakdown about I'm not doing this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I can save the world and couldn't save my daughter and blah, blah, blah. And I heard so clearly from within myself, Iyanla, if they don't know that you can't do what you say you can do, then you're smarter than them anyway. Keep walking.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, thank,
I
thank.
just kept walking.
Well, I am so
you know,
thankful.
I just kept walking. I
I'm
went
so
to the
thankful
next
you.
speaking engagement. I did the next workshop. And the other thing I really embraced, for me, I embraced a Buddhist principle. My dear friend, Reverend Michael Beckwith, said to me, Iyanla, for the next year, do everything in her name. If
Mm,
you're not good enough to do it in her name. And
mhm.
so everything I did in Jamia's name. I did
Ah,
for her. I did because she supported it. I did it the way she would have me do it. And that's really how I got through it. So fast forward 20 years later, when I lost my second daughter, last year, I knew how to do it because the same feelings came up. The same thing came up. And it's like, here you go again, saving the world, fixing people, fixing lives, and your daughter dies alone in her apartment. And the first thing I said to myself was, it's not going to stop me.
mhm.
It is not going to stop me, you know? So again, I think that you got to navigate and negotiate what comes up from your internal landscape.
Right.
And then you have to really tune out what's coming from you to you from the outside. Because sure enough, when I went to my Instagram page, there were people. See, I told you she was a fraud. She
Mm-hmm.
can't even save her own children.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And
I
I said,
really,
yeah,
really thank you for sharing such a personal story, and it's still so fresh and new, and I guess it will always be fresh and new. But one of the points you talked about was the fact that you felt like you could save everybody. Here you were saving everybody, and when it came to your daughters, other people were saying this that you couldn't save them, although they had some real medical issues, and you never
yeah,
said you were God, right?
no,
So, but we won't
no.
even get into that. But one of the common characteristics of the imposter syndrome, and I think this is really unique to powerful women, to Black women, is this superwoman piece that we're socialized and raised to believe that we could be all things to all people and we can solve all of these problems and issues. And when you get into imposter syndrome, they talk a lot about that being true for us as women. And I know when we look at these archetypes for Black women, the superwoman is a pronounced one for us, but it's also
Yeah.
one for women in general. So talk a little bit about that. Have you seen this superwoman
Yeah.
archetype
And
be?
I resigned from that committee. I no longer serve on the Superwoman committee.
Oh, good for you.
Because to be a mother and to be a professional and to be a partner and all of those things. So I think I resigned from the Superwoman committee when after Jamia's death, and that's
Mhm.
been 20 years, because I recognize the first person I need to take care of is myself. So can I save me from what's going on inside of me? Let me handle that before I start reaching out. And
Yeah.
then the other thing that for me, resigning from the Superwoman committee was building my no muscle, building my no muscle,
Say a
learning that
little bit
I
of
have
building your, excuse me, Yana, you said building your no muscle.
no, my no muscle.
Oh,
How to
N-O.
say no without the
Oh,
guilt. Yeah.
yes.
No. I had to build my no muscle. I had
Okay.
to learn that I have a right to say no. I had to learn that I can choose when to say no. I can choose who to say no to because that without the guilt, without the guilt. But once I took off the superwoman cape and recognize that's not my job. That's not let me not be trying to out God
Yeah.
saving people. I can't save myself from a bag of Lay's potato chips. You put a bag of Lay's potato chips in front of me and I can't save myself. So why am I trying to save human lives?
That's my confession, Lay's potato chips. And we're not being paid to endorse Lay's potato chips, by the way. So
Yeah, so I couldn't. So I had to learn to say no.
yeah.
No. And develop that checkpoint inside. And sometimes I say no because I don't want to.
So Iyanla, I love the your sharing how you made your personal, how you walked through it, right? How you worked it out in your
Yeah.
in the deaths of both of your daughters. I mean, every time I think about it, I just it gives me a moment of pause. When you were coaching people like on Iyanla Fix My Life and they were dealing with the imposter syndrome, what was some of the first the steps you took them through to deal with it?
Well, I think it's different for everyone. You've got to find out, okay, what are you an imposter at?
Mhm,
Why do you think you're an imposter? Because you've got to get down to that because sometimes it's just a toxic internal dialogue.
mhm,
Now, that's one part. If it's because people said this or because I didn't do that, I think one of the most challenging cases I had was a woman who, I mean, she was debilitated by it. She was brilliant,
mhm,
but debilitated by feeling like an imposter because she had been sexually abused as a child
mm,
and told herself that she had participated in it because it was a known person and it happened more than once. And when she told, nothing was done about it.
mhm,
So she learned that what happens to her and her feelings and her needs don't matter. So whenever she, in the world, in her work world, if anyone expressed any level of disappointment or
mhm.
upset with her, she went into her imposter syndrome. See, I knew, I'm not worth this. I can't do this. And it was all hinged on the fact that she had been sexually molested when she was 9. So she had it coming, her internal dialogue
Mhm.
created a filter through which she perceived the feedback she was getting from her universe. Everybody's going to make mistakes. You can't
Mm,
please everybody.
correct.
Sometimes you'll drop the ball, but that doesn't mean that your whole life is worthless now and that you are worthless.
So it seems to me, Iyanla, that one of the what you helped her do was to come to some kind of awareness of it, right?
Yeah.
To take the
Yeah.
time to explore, like you said, to get underneath the hood around, what is it? Why am I feeling it? When does it happen? So this whole notion of self awareness, but it also seemed like she was very smart at reaching out for some help. And maybe she didn't know
Well,
what she needed help with, but she reached
right.
out.
One of the things that I remember working with her and with people in the imposter syndrome is to make a distinction between a thought and a feeling.
Hmm.
People will say, I feel like an imposter. And I
Yes.
say, that's not a feeling. A feeling is one word. A
Hmm.
thought is several strung together. So when you say, I feel like an imposter, that is not a feeling. That
Oh,
is a thought. Now let's get to the root of that thought. So that
wow. That's
means it's coming to me from the internal landscape.
hmm and it's so important to make that distinction because as you noted before, and it's been part of my experience that this imposter syndrome, so much of it is kind of a cognitive thing in the brain, right? Kind of your mindset. And oftentimes
Yeah.
people can't distinguish what they're thinking versus from what they're really feeling. So how do you help them separate that? What I'm thinking, what's up here in my mind versus what I'm feeling? Because you said thinking is a lot of words, but feeling is one. Give us an example.
One word. I feel sad. I feel happy. I feel angry. I feel disappointed. I
Hmm.
feel the feelings are one word. Anytime I feel like I let you down, that's a thought. I feel like I shouldn't be here. That's a thought. So there's something that is triggered up, stirred up, implanted at the level of the internal landscape that is feeding these thoughts. So the first thing you want to do is make a distinction between what are you thinking and what are you feeling.
Okay, so
I
that
feel, I think I'm an imposter, and that
Mhm.
makes me feel what? You're an imposter. How do you feel about that?
Wow. So Iyanla, now they've been able to make this distinction between a thought and a feeling, right? Then what do they
Mhm.
do next with that?
Well,
How do
feelings
you
are
work it out
usually,
with them on that?
a feeling is usually triggered by a memory.
Hmm.
There may be a traumatic memory. It may be a program memory. And you have to investigate the feeling.
Hmm.
You have to. You got to trace it back to its origins
Hmm.
so that you can find out what's going on underneath there. Now,
Hmm.
a thought that takes a little more processing.
Okay.
Okay, so if you're a fraud, if you're an imposter, now what?
Okay.
And the reason you want to investigate the thought is because eventually you'll drop into the feeling. It's
Right.
just the process.
Right.
You know,
Well,
you're you're
that's
you're
what
an imposter.
it's
So now
interesting.
what?
Yep. What's so interesting about what you're saying is that the literature and the studies indicate that for people who have been subjected to bias, I mean, they could be disabled people, they could be LGBTQ people, they could be people of color, they could be people of women. That oftentimes it's the ongoing biases that they encounter that begin to shape their thoughts about being an imposter. Maybe they didn't even necessarily start out like that, but they get in a workplace environment and people say, you're here because of affirmative action. You're really not that good. Affirmative action got you here. And it's these repetitive, biased kind of comments that they're hearing. And then they start thinking, well, maybe that's true. And I guess from your point of view, that begins to generate some feelings. But right then and that point, are you saying that they need to get really focus on what is the source of some of this kind of headspace they're in around being an imposter?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And okay, so the microaggressions that give you
Right,
those thoughts and feelings. But you're here now.
right.
You're here. Okay. You're here. And so now what are you going to do?
Then what are you
You're
gonna
an
do?
imposter. You still pay taxes. You still pay to get on the bus. You still got to pay the toll to go across the bridge. You are an imposter. So now what you going to do? I mean, for me, I'm just going there. You're an imposter. Now what? They
What?
didn't know it, so that makes you smarter than them anyhow. Okay.
So you
And
so you
even if
put
you
some
got here because
reality
of,
up in here. You say
okay,
okay,
even if
yeah.
you got here by affirmative action, you'll still get a check you can cash.
Hmm.
Sometimes you have to take an internal, you've got to be really ruthless and vigilant about how you engage and entertain those things that are coming at you. The other big thing, Vanessa,
Hmm.
huge, as it relates to the imposter syndrome, is comparing yourself to other people. Comparing yourself to other people is an act of violence against yourself. And
An
I
act of
remember when I
violence.
first started doing this work, and I had been doing it about 12, 15 years, and then along came Marianne Williamson, who was filling up centers and filling up the town hall. And I was like, oh man, I'm not filling up centers like that. I want to be like Marianne Williamson,
Hmm.
you know. But comparing yourself
To
is
others.
an act of violence against yourself,
Yeah, we're
and
gonna
it
put that
will
on the screen.
undermine, diminish your value, your worth, your esteem, your respect for yourself.
Well, Iyanla, I tell you, it seemed like we just started talking a couple of minutes ago about this whole
Yeah.
imposter syndrome. And there were several things you said I want to just kind of touch base before we close out today. And one is just even creating the self awareness that you're struggling with
Yeah.
something that is more than just every now and then question or thought, but it's really impacting how you choose to live your life. And then you talked about, making a separation between what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and the importance of that. And then you talked about really identifying and connecting with what your self-worth is, identifying, what are those things or what are people saying and doing that are coming against you, and how do you step back and push back on that, push back on those things that aren't true, and then not comparing yourself to others, because that's an act of self-violence, or that's an act of violence against yourself. I just feel that those points were just so powerful and will be so helpful to our audience. So on behalf of our Working It Out crew, I wanted again to thank you, Iyanla Vanzant, the renowned Iyanla Vanzant. And I'll close with my typical saying, have a be happy week, and let's work it out together. Bye-bye.
Got problems on the job, we're working it out. Workplace got you stressing, we're working it out. Yeah, we're working it out, working it out, working it out.